you go ahead and take a look at Timeline Project, you'll notice there are 3 documents in there, right? The first one is the Timeline Project template. The next one is an intro video from Brother Pat. I'm going to replace that video with this video, so you can ignore that video. And then you've got the Timeline Project itself. Okay. So we'll start with the third document on there for us. It might be easier to start with that, right, to kind of get an idea of what we're doing, right? So off the bat here, right, you got a lot of time to do this project. It's not due till March 5th, right? So it's about 6 weeks if you look at the calendar, right? 6 weeks. So I would encourage you to start ASAP, right? Like right away in doing this, right? And to make a short story long, what you're going to be doing with the project is you're going to pick, right, the most important events from each chapter, right, and tell us about each of those events, and then find a creative way to display the events. Does that make sense? All right. So in order to aid you in this, we probably should have started with the template one. Actually, it'd be easier. So go back to the timeline template sheets. Right. In order to aid you in this, we've created a template for you. Right. So in the beginning, notice that's the first chapter of our book. You're going to go to the in the beginning chapter, and you're going to pick what you believe to be the 5 most important events that happened in this chapter. Does that make sense? Right? You get to pick. It's entirely up to you. Right? And then on your final project, you're going to write for me a couple of sentences about what that event is. Right? And that should really basically be like the why it's so important that you chose it over the other ones, right? So for me, right, the first event should be something about creation, right? Right? The creation of the world. God creates the world in 7 days. Right? And then from there, it's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go with the fall of Adam and Eve? Right? Do you want to go with the, God creates on the 6 days, go with the creation of man? Then you want to do the fall? Right? Or do you want to go to the fall of man? Then you want to go to Proto-Evangelium? And then you want to cut to Cain kills Abel? And then to Noah? And leave out the Tower of Babel? It's fine by me. Whatever you want to do. Or do you want to do the creation of the world? Fall of man? Right? And then just jump into Cain kills Abel, Noah and the flood, Tower of Babel. What do you want to do? Right? You pick what you think are the 5 most important events happening in that chapter. Does that make sense? Right? That's not overly difficult to do, right? And you're going to do that for each chapter, all right? For each chapter, all the way to the divided kingdom, which we've started already. Okay. You're also going to tell me who are 3 main people in that chapter. Yeah, right. So Adam and Eve, Noah, right? Cain and Abel, right? Like all the main characters. I just pick them, right? There's a way to identify who they are. Narrative book. Right, means where in the Bible would I find these stories? Right, where in the Bible would I find these stories? Okay, right. So what would be the answer? What would be the answer? Where would we find these stories of the creation of the world? In the book of Genesis. You just write Genesis, and then down here at the bottom, you write first typology. Right? Is there any typology that takes place in this entire chapter? Right? What is going on here in this chapter that's pointing us to the New Testament, right? And so you can talk about how God creates Adam and Eve, and it takes place in the garden. The first fall, the first sin of man takes place in the garden. Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? When he's arrested, right? So it's like this full circle event, right? The fall takes place in the garden. The redemption starts in the garden, right? You can talk about the Proto-Evangelium, right? You can talk about the flood being a type for baptism, right? Whatever you want. Right, it's entirely up to you. You have lots of options here for you to make. Does that make sense? All right, Mr. Chase?
Can you say God the main character?
Yes, you can put God, but don't tell me God for every single section. All right. I'm gonna call foul on that, right? Because I would say in this chapter specifically, God plays a very unique role with creation. Does that make sense? But you can't just write God for every single one. And then now you've got God as your main person. Like, God is almost one of those, like, hits implied. God's the main actor in all of this. Right? I'll allow it for the first one because he's creating. But you can't put him for every single one after that. Right? Because then there's other people that we need to talk about. All right. And so you can do that for all the chapters, right? All the chapters, right? Notice some of our chapters are longer than others, so we have more events. Okay? More events. Now, this filled out to me, right, is due next Friday. Does that make sense? Next Friday. So you have a week, right? Or really more than a week because today's only Thursday. So you have 8 days, right, to do this whole thing, right? And when you hand it in, if it's completed well, right, and everything looks good, you get 2 quiz grades. That's what 2 quiz grades, right? So if you do well, you get 200s on your quizzes. That's fantastic, right? So it's like a nice 200s, right, for your quiz. Just do it well, right? Just fill it in, all right? The last thing on here says that my project format will be a what? What are you going to use to display your project? Right? What are you going to use to display your project? Right? How is the timeline going to be kind of organized? Right? And so in the classroom here, I have a quilt. Right? I have this quilt. Right? You notice as you go through, you got the creation. Right? You got the tree with the serpent and the apple, Noah and the ark, burning bush, crossing the Red Sea, Ark of the Covenant, bronze serpent, Battle of Jericho, Jonah and the whale. And then she has all of her information in the back, like in a pocket, right? If you look over here, this thing, this is a project that I have, right? It's got all these little images that's falling apart. It's a couple of years old now. But at the bottom, she's got a scroll. She's got all of her timeline information in the scroll. See that? I'll see the scroll for the people in the video, right? You see? So she's got it all there in her scroll, right? I have this over here. It's a crossword puzzle, right? Right, and all of her events, all the answers here, and then the descriptions are all in here, right? That was it. I framed it. She didn't frame it. I framed it.
What student made that?
Right. They should have junior now. You got my candles. Right. This is chapter 7. Right. This is chapter 7. This is the divided kingdom. On the back, she has all of her events, timeline period, and she's got all her little notes here. Right. No. She made 7 candles. 1 for each time period. The candles are all over here. See? I'll take this one out. That's not good. Right, so she had a candle for each timeline period, right? Right, and so like each one, and she's got all of her information written on these little tabs, right? The little tabs. Excellent projects, right? Over here, I got some other things. This one is fantastic. One of my favorites. This young man was into drawing. Made a little scrapbook. Look at this. He drew this whole thing by hand. Right? Look at that. Ooh, yeah, that's fantastic, right? That's unbelievable, right? Like, and his handwriting is very neat. It's beautiful, right? That was fantastic. This was another one from a lady from I think she's a junior also. It's a little activity book. Right? It's got some little pop-ups coming out, right? When you open it up, right? It's all little puzzles that describe the events, right? That word searches. Like an activity book for kids, pop up, right? Stuff like this. All right. I got a couple of Shutterfly books, right? Shutterfly books, right? That the students have made. This is an easy option, right? If you lack creativity like I do, Shutterfly basically makes the book for you. You just put the information, the words in it, you hit print. I'm a big Shutterfly book guy, right? Because it tells me you didn't wait till the night before, because you gotta wait a couple weeks, the week for it to be processed and shipped. Right, so that's all there. You got that? The weird cutout of myself in the back. That's a project as well. Right, and you've seen this. The thing that was on the door. That was a project. All the information for the timelines on the back. Right? Yeah. Does this make sense? I used to have a puzzle. My puzzle's gone missing. Right, but there's also I got tons of projects up here that you can come and take a look at. Here's another Shutterfly book for you. Right, my fireplace was a project. This was a project as well. The student had all the timeline information displayed on the outside of it. Right. So what you want to do as far as your format is entirely up to you. It's entirely up to you, right? I would ask your parents, like, what skills do you have that you can help me with, right? Figure it out. Like, what can you do? So the only limitation on what you can do is we put a size on it. Right, we put a size on it, right? If you go back to our initial project sheet, right, it'll tell you that the final project can be no larger than 4 feet by 4 feet. Right?
I want to pick up.
That's in here somewhere. Right? Why? So like that's like this. Now, why? Why do we have to do that? Because projects started to become like larger and larger and larger to the point where we had a young lady back in 2019 build a like a replica of the Sistine Chapel. She built it in her garage, took it apart, and then Dad reassembled it in the lobby. It was a 10 by 10 room. Like it was like we had to turn the fire alarms off in the lobby because the fire alarms there are like beams that go across and it interrupted. Like it was just too big. It was a great project. It was beautiful, but it was just too big, right? Like so 4 by 4 people. We're putting if you can't bring it in through the door, right? Then it's too large. Does that make sense, right? I got lots of pictures I can show you guys as well. We've had like Jacob's ladders, right? People take a ladder and they display that. Whatever you want to be creative, right? It's entirely up to you. Now, I'll take your question in just a second. The final project is due March 5th, and it's worth 3 test grades. You got that? 3 test grades. 2 of those test grades are in this trimester. 1 of those test grades is in the 3rd trimester. You got that? Right, so if you do this well, most students do really well on this project. You got a nice, like hundo or a 97 or a 96 test grade in your back pocket going into the 3rd trimester. All right, so it's worth a lot. So put your effort into this. And the projects will all be displayed in the lobby for your classmates to see, right? It's cool to watch the upperclassmen come through the building and look at the freshman patricia projects because they all did this when they were freshmen, right? And so they like to talk about it and see what the freshmen did. And it's a cool little like bonding thing for our school community. All right? So, yeah.
Like, how do you decide, like, which one? So, like, that one has, like, all these pictures on it, but if there are, like, multiple events for each slide, then how do you know?
Whatever you like. Right? So that's the idea. Is I don't want you just to go through and pick the section titles. I want you to go through and pick what you believe to be the most important events. Does that make sense? There's no wrong answer to this. But there are certain events that, like, I think you should be in there. And so if you leave those out, you have to be able to explain the events you chose so well that would make sense that you left it out. Like the crossing of the Red Sea should be a story that's in there with Egypt, right? How do you not have that story in there? The Passover, that's a big story, right? The plagues, the burning bush, right? Like, how do you leave out those stories, right? We're not just going through, picking the titles of our sections, right? I want you to pick the events that are the most important in each chapter, right? Which means you have to make a decision. All right, which also means that there should really be nobody that has the same 50 events.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what are the chances of that happening, folks?
It's pretty rare.
Pretty small. Right? So don't go through and just pick section titles. Go through and pick events from each chapter. Right? I don't care what events you pick. Right? But you have to, pick ones that are the important events. Right? The important events. Okay? Like, if you want to put Ruth, I think Ruth is fantastic for the period of time. It's great. Right? Crossing of the Jordan, I think that's great. Battle of Jericho, great, right? Rahab saves the spies, great, right? I think they're all good things. Okay? What you get to pick, whatever you like. All right? Yeah.
For the thing next Friday, do we just like put the titles on the
Just the titles, that's it.
And then for the project, we have to just like write like a description about each
You have to
event?
explain each event.
Okay.
Right? 1 to 2 sentences is the minimum. In life, you never want to do the minimum, Nick. Right? Remember that? Right? We don't do the minimum. 1 to 2 sentences is the minimum. Right? Right, the next one. But never do the minimum in life. Right? Always do a little more. Don't pay the minimum on your credit card bill because you'll be paying a lot more money than you owe. Right? Pay it off. Pay off that credit card bill. Put as much as you can. Right? I like content. I want to know what you've learned. And this is also a great study tool for your comp. In the end, a lot of students use this project to study for their comp because you're basically summarizing the Old Testament. Right? You're creating a timeline of important events throughout the Old Testament. All right? Does anybody have any questions? We good? All right. It's fantastic. I'm going to turn the video off then. All right. Good luck.